morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Monday. We have a huge show for you today. Number of exciting guests, great topics. Hello, Brianna.
Hello, Robbie.
How was your weekend?
It was good. It was busy. It's good to be back. I feel like there's been a lot of news that I'm looking forward to getting right into it.
Yeah, me too. I went to Denver this weekend. I did with my boys from high school, and it's like the Cornell track team, and they're like in way better shape than I am. We did pickleball and golf and hiking, and it's like the most physical exertion I've ever had in my 30s, but it was a lot of fun.
That feels really wholesome, Robbie.
It was wholesome.
I lay in bed all weekend and looked at Twitter, as those of you who are online probably know, but we'll get to some of that later in the show.
We are definitely going to hit that a little bit later. But first...
All right, well, summer is over officially on Capitol Hill. I'm in my Annie Hall fall gear. And also Congress has returned from its August recess, and House Republicans are back on the impeachment grind. Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer told Newsmax last week that an impeachment inquiry would give more weight to the committee's attempts to investigate President Biden's alleged pay-for-play influence peddling scheme.
While new criminal charges have yet to be filed against Hunter Biden, the president and his son are going on the offensive in the court of public opinion. Hunter Biden's allies are going into full attack mode against Republicans in this next Congress. Gloves are off, families are on, per reporting in Puck News. Meanwhile, writers of the New York Times offered a sympathetic profile of the Biden family in a new piece published this weekend. Per the Times, quote, the president plunged into sadness and frustration when Hunter Biden's plea deal fell apart. Since then, his tone in conversations about his son has been tinged with a resignation that was not there before, end quote. Per the Times, President Biden has, quote, kept Hunter close despite the political peril. The possibility of a federal indictment of Hunter Biden stunned the president, yet the bond between him and his only surviving son is, quote, ironclad. Buried later in the Times story is this admission. Allies to the president say his, quote, inability to say no to Hunter caused, at the minimum, avoidable political distractions.
That is quite the admission. Because, I mean, this is a problem for Democrats because, as we talked about last week with Michael De La Rosa, Biden overpromised when he was describing the distance between him and his son. Making statements about how there was no discussion of his business dealings whatsoever makes him seem less credible when there is some evidence of some discussion there, even if it is de minimis and not particularly substantial. The question is, if you were misrepresenting that much, what else have you been misrepresenting? And an admission like that in this article really speaks to that idea that the closeness, the relationship that he's touted as an attribute of him and his family so often might have led him to be uncareful, not necessarily having broken any law. The Republicans have yet to prove that, but at very least not very careful. And so does that warrant then further investigation?
Right. Which is what Republicans are campaigning on. It's one of the most central issues to the Republican Party right now to focus on, what's going on in Congress, the additional investigations, and this plea deal. And that's an interesting detail to know that Joe Biden was dismayed about the plea deal falling apart. Obviously, that could be dismay for the situation that puts his son in, the possibility of jail charges. There could also be some dismay of what that means for additional investigations, because remember, this plea deal was going to totally shield Hunter Biden from any further inquiry, potentially into potential wrongdoing with Burisma and influence peddling that might have reflected poorly on Joe Biden. So he could be shedding tears for his son's fate and also his own odds of facing more serious talk of impeachment or investigation.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the part of the plea deal, the plea deal didn't fall through because it fell through. The plea deal fell through because Hunter Biden,
the judge looked under the hood.
Well, the Hunter Biden's attorneys decided that absent the protection from further investigation, they didn't want to take the remaining deal. But the substance of the remaining deal could have remained intact insofar as it allowed him to avoid the jail time, et cetera. So I think there is a little bit of confusion that's happening here, where if the concern is really just, I don't want my son to have to face jail time, I think that was still on the table. But they blew up the entire thing because it really was, apparently from the perspective of Hunter Biden's camp and lawyer team and him himself, all about shielding himself from immunity from not unrelated investigations.
Right. After the judge pointed out how unusual this deal was, that it was, suggesting that it was almost prosecutorial malpractice to include it, which, something the judge can do in cases, can say, hey, this deal that's put together is very bad. I'm going to make sure everyone understands what's going on here. Would that seem to be the case? And as you point out, Hunter Biden's team
only wanted it with that protection, which is very telling. Yeah. Now, let me ask you a political question. There's a part of me that wants to dive into what will it mean for Joe Biden if there's an impeachment? Does this basically cancel out for folks what Donald Trump is going through with the 4 indictments? Does it not really matter to Democratic voters the way that it doesn't really matter to Donald Trump voters, given that 3/4 of voters and a substantial number of Democrats don't want Joe Biden to be the nominee? Is this more damning for him than it would be for Donald Trump? But another part of me says none of that is going to be relevant because of the news events over the weekend, more footage that we're going to talk about later of Joe Biden not seeming like his best self in Vietnam, increasing chatter about alternative Democratic nominees, that it's looking more and more likely to me that he just might not be the nominee in the first place. Yeah, you keep saying that. And look, I understand, obviously, many Democrats want a different nominee. A majority of Democrats want a different nominee. He is historically old. He seems increasingly, recently, in just the weeks. Old. for a president, for someone running for office again. He's the oldest of all time. Yeah. He is... In his remarks recently, he seemed so disoriented. And people are paying special attention to all this now with Mitch McConnell, with Dianne Feinstein. Yeah. We're all spectating the elderly in government. It's kind of sick, but it's not our fault. We should say this because there was one political commentator, a Biden booster who's of some note, we've talked about her in the past on the show, who was irritated on Twitter over the weekend because people were wishing Bernie Sanders a happy birthday at the same time that the timeline was criticizing Nancy Pelosi for announcing another term. And she was saying, well, this is sexist and hypocritical. Of course the issue is that Bernie Sanders isn't announcing another Senate term. Maybe he would also get pushback for that. But also, the conversation really should be about people's mental capacity and their substantive policy record. Right. Bernie Sanders doesn't seem that old. Donald Trump, frankly, doesn't seem that old. Frankly, Nancy Pelosi doesn't seem old. No. The issue there is substantively whether people like her politics or not. Right. And why does she have to stay? She retired as leader of the is she still belong in Congress? Right. But the Biden thing is not his age. It's his behavior. I just don't know who... I don't disagree with you on any of that. I just think the person who gets to decide that there will be no more Biden government is Biden himself. Yes. I don't see, especially on the Democratic side, who pushes him out. What is the secret cabal of insider, smoke-filled room people who say, no more Biden? We're moving on. Look, I don't know who that is. I think that's Biden. Many people believe that cabal definitely exists because they see the coordinated mechanism of the Democratic Party being able to, for example, in 2020, say, despite Pete Buttigieg being probably the most successful person not named Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary to date, Barack Obama was able to get on the call and get him, Amy Klobuchar, all of the centrists that were coming in first or second place in those early primary contests and drop out and coalesce behind Joe Biden to defeat Bernie Sanders, who was an outsider threat to the Democratic Party establishment. Obviously, Democratic Party has the capacity to do that. I mean, if Obama makes the call to Biden to retire early, I don't know what maybe that does it. I don't know. But maybe it actually will come from Biden himself, though, because there does seem to be. It is getting to a place of... I don't think so. Well, I don't want to step on our future segment, but we'll dive into specifically what behaviors out of this Vietnam trip are causing people to have so many questions about whether or not he really has the mental fitness to lead. Yeah, more Rising right after this.